We got a little Russian mortar training going on here with an over-anxious recruit. Comes in, that's not the right way. Backwards, upside down, I'm not sure the right way to describe that. But he gets stopped, pulls a safety pin, so step in the right direction, and then right back to it. You know, I've seen people try with all their might to load M4 mags in backwards, but a mortar, that's a first. We got a couple videos on artillery and a couple on tanks today. So notably, one of the artillery videos is on a pretty unique Ukrainian howitzer that we just don't see very often, so kind of some rare footage. And then we've got drone footage showing a Russian tank raid in Marinka that I think really kind of highlights the level of devastation in Ukraine right now. So we got a video here showing kind of a day in the life of a M777 operator in Ukraine. So about 150 of these have been sent to Ukraine since the start of the war. Other operators are the United States, kind of the primary one, Canada, Australia, India, and I think there's a few others kind of on the docket. But this is kind of like the standard towed 155mm howitzer for the United States. You know, it can reach targets out to around 40 kilometers, really depends more on the munition, the round being fired than the actual howitzer. But there's been a lot of debate when it comes to towed howitzers in this war. And I think it's kind of proven both sides of that argument. So the argument against towed howitzers is that the counter battery threat is so significant, especially in a contested theater like Ukraine, that setting up in a position for any significant period of time and not being able to quickly displace just means that this equipment is set to be lost. As soon as they start firing, they're going to be targeted by counter battery fire. But even in this video, you'll see, I don't think that's exactly the case. A couple of these setups, here's one, they've pretty clearly been there for quite a while. They're not exactly shooting and scooting and getting out of that firing point. Now, when you're looking at a 777 crew, even a highly experienced, very capable crew, it's going to take a few more minutes to get set up firing those rounds and displace than if something were to wheel up or on a tracked vehicle be able to get in and out that much faster. But at the end of the day, the cost is substantially cheaper than anything that's wheeled or tracked, so they do still have a place on the modern battlefield. Most of the rounds in this video look just like kind of the standard HE or high explosive, but the 777, being 155mm howitzer, can also fire the Excalibur round, which is a GPS-guided munition that can range targets out to around 40 kilometers, as well as the recently sent over DPICM. This is a pretty unique video here. So this is a 2S22 Bohdana, which is a self-propelled 155mm howitzer designed and manufactured inside of Ukraine. There's not, a lot of weapon systems that meet that criteria right now. Notably, this was developed as a 155mm howitzer, which is the NATO standard, as opposed to the 152 Russian standard, which made up the bulk of Ukraine's inventory and weapon systems prior to the war. So it's kind of forward-looking by Ukraine if you think about it. Now, there's not a ton of these. I think they first rolled out back in 2018, and I've heard like single digits have actually been manufactured, tested, and fielded to some degree. There's been some interesting debate around the viability of these wheeled self-propelled howitzers for a long time, but it's kind of coming to surface here during the war in Ukraine. So it's things like this 2S22 or the Swedish Archer, which is pretty similar in a lot of ways. I mean, in the United States, our self-propelled howitzers are tracked. And generally speaking, tracked vehicles are a lot more expensive. They break down much faster or more often, and they're a lot harder to move to various locations all around the world. They're not as mobile when it comes to shipping them to various theaters of war. So the whole idea behind these wheeled self-propelled howitzers is kind of a middle ground. You got towed on one hand, which is very cheap, all things considered, but there's no mobility. And then on the other hand, you've got tracked, which is pretty expensive, but a lot of mobility, a lot of survivability. That middle ground of wheeled self-propelled howitzers, cheaper than tracked, more mobile than towed, we'll see, but there could be some future there. All right, coming in hot here is the Stridsvagn 122, which I probably mispronounced, but it's the Swedish main battle tank. They've donated 10 of these to Ukraine. And what we're seeing here is those either being received, going through some sort of training, or staging for some sort of combat operations. So it's got a different name, but this is essentially a Leopard 2A5. So when Sweden was going about building and kind of developing a new battle tank, they decided rather than start from scratch, they were going to take a few kind of key examples from some of their Western allies, and they looked at the Leopard 2A5, and they looked at the Abrams, and at the end of the day, the Leopard won out. So when they made some modifications, there's slight adjustments here and there, but for the most part, unless you really, really dive down into the details and you're a tank expert and know everything about that, this weapon system is essentially a Leopard 2A5. This is some drone footage from Marinka, which is in eastern Ukraine. It's an area that's been at the front of the fighting really since 2014. And I think what we see here is actually what we're hearing more about, kind of a Russian tank raid. You're gonna see one Russian tank kind of rolling through these ruins. But I wanted to show this because, this wasn't a major city, and what you're gonna see here is kind of on the outskirts, but it just shows the absolute destruction that is being leveled all across this country. When you say cities are in ruins or towns are in ruins, you're gonna see in a second here, some of this is just rubble. Like, it wouldn't even be, there's a point in an urban fight where the buildings are kind of knocked down and destroyed, and there's holes in the walls, and it almost becomes, better for urban combat, for the defender at least, because there's a lot of places to hide and fight through. But look at this. There's nothing left but like occasional walls here and there. Talk about rebuilding after the war. This is, how do you rebuild this? It's like it's starting from scratch at this point. But we're gonna key in here on this Russian tank. It kind of looks like it's exiting an area, but there's been a lot of talk recently around tank usage in Ukraine and kind of how that's adapted throughout the war. One of the ways that Ukraine has reported that Russia has been using their tanks is more in kind of a raid fashion. So 1 to 3 tanks sent forward at dawn or dusk, which, if you look here, the sun does appear to either be rising or setting, so it's roughly that time of day. And they just charge forward kind of across what we might call no man's land, contested area like you see here. And they just start slinging rounds into the Ukrainian position at a time where there might be going through a shift change. Maybe the guards are changing out at the front. There might be new Ukrainian units coming in, replacing those that are in the fighting positions. So the whole idea, like, that wasn't the tank. The tank didn't fire that round. Somebody fired at that tank. So there is some sort of engagement going on here. But the whole concept of this tank raid is to kind of minimize the exposure to the tank force, to get them over there, firing a few rounds, turn around and haul back while inflicting not necessarily a mass amount of casualties, right? At this distance, one tank not really going to pull that off, but could sow a lot of confusion, for the defenders having to dodge these random tank rounds in the middle of the afternoon or late afternoon or early evening as they're trying to maybe consolidate for a mission or get things ready for the next day. But anyways, I think this video does a great job of just showing kind of the absolute levels of destruction that are seen all across portions of Ukraine right now. Look at the shell holes just dotting the landscape. There's actually some houses left here, which is more than other places. It's, when this war ends, there's still going to be a lot of rebuilding, years, decades, for whoever assumes that cost. But that's all I got for now. Be sure to check out the national security set reps I put out on Substack if interested. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.